Greetings and welcome back to Intro to World Geography. We are going to be looking at Chapter 7 this week, Human Interaction. So we're about to getting to the halfway point of the course. I remember as a boy growing up in the town that I did, in between walking from my house to my friend's house and back along the route, there was a lady named Mrs. Derry. Mrs. Derry was retired, and I'd see her out working in her garden a lot. Very nice lady, would always talk to me, 11 or 12-year-old boy at the time. And because of Mrs. Derry, I was never afraid of getting old. My first, impressions of it were always good because Mrs. Derry, I remember she did like three things. She was telling me one day she just goes to church on Sunday. She goes shopping. I was shopping on Tuesday, and she went to the senior center nearby to play bridge. And she didn't do a whole lot. That was her activity space. That was her activity space, and I remember thinking, must be nice to be older and retired. And I often sometimes think about Mrs. Derry as I get closer to those ages. I never feared getting old, probably because of her. At any rate, activity space. We're going to delve into that as well as several other things in this chapter. Let's start looking at those things now as I get the lecture model up. Human interaction. In this chapter, we're going to explain activity space. We want to understand factors involved in migration and relate the effects of distance. So some major heads up terms to get you guys some spoilers here for the lecture. Human interaction. Human interaction is basically communicating and the interdependence between folks. Spatial interaction. Spatial interaction, this is the movement of people, goods, information between places. Activity space, right? Activity space, these are the regular routines, right? Regular routines that we engage in. And then the concepts of distance. Distance decay, the farther things are away, the less interaction you have with it. Critical distance. There's a certain point where you will not travel. You will not take the time to engage in it. There's a certain point. Psychological distance. Things that you're familiar with just seem closer, right? Things you're familiar with. People view places that they're familiar with as closer. Contagious diffusion, right? All ideas, right? All these ideas start someplace and they spread out. Hierarchical diffusion is where those ideas, as they spread and get bigger, they get interjected with, organizational structures. Push and pull factors, we're talking about migration here. Push factors are those factors that are pushing people away from a certain area. Pull factors, the amenities, right? The amenities that are pulling people to an area. Place utility is like a substitute for actually being there and learning about the area. You study it, you have a perception of it. And then globalization, the intertwining of the world's cultures. So at the very top of activity space, I have some white space for you, and talk about these notes here. The interaction between people and their communication amounts to human interaction. So when geographers speak of spatial interaction, they're basically looking at a flow of movement, the flow of goods, ideas, and of course, people, diseases from one place over a distance of separation to another. Now, an activity space. An activity space is the regular routines that we employ. And you can turn to figure 7.6, page 192 to scope out a visual of that. So with activity space, in these routines, we go about our business relatively free from constraint or concern about whether we can actually perform it or not. And these include our regular journeys. I would say this too. You don't have to write it down, but each individual operates within a unique activity space whose nature and I would say extent of that differs in accordance with someone's age, their sex, their wealth, their employment, or other personal variables, a person's stage of life, and their means of mobility, will determine things like their activity space. If you take a look at that activity space, the illustration of it, I would encourage you to look at that and see who you think the authors think out of a family of four who has the wider activity space. But folk all over the world have the same functions, but the frequency and the duration of such activity kind of depends on where they live. I mean, some people don't have the economy, and because they don't have a good economy, they don't have the means to travel, right, and enlarge their activity space. It's just not conducive to reliable automobiles, maybe the terrain. Take a look at this concept here of distance. Distance decay assures the greatest intensity of space use nearest the home or activity base. Distance decay. Distance decay is because of distances, the interaction with persons or activities will decrease, regardless if we have FaceTime or not. I think when people move away, out of sight, out of mind, it just decreases. Critical distance, that line that gets crossed, which makes the opportunity costs of travel not worth it, right? Make it not worth it. At present juncture, my travel ceilings depend on gas prices. My campus I work out of, the live campus I work out of, is in the Johnstown area. I live in Somerset, and we have a branch down here in Somerset, but we also have branches in Huntington, Evansburg, and Altoona. My gas budget and the wear and tear on my car will take me as far as for my opportunity cost Evansburg. That's stretching the limit. Being down Somerset, just hop on 219. Altoona and certainly Huntington, that's not going to cut it for me. I'm going to be losing there. Some of you face the same thing with exams, right? You get up at 6 a.m. And you're used to getting up at 7 a.m., you lose an hour of sleep, but you could get a better grade on the exam. Whereas if you choose to stay and keep that alarm till 7 and lose an hour of study, it might make a difference too, right? So there's opportunity costs. Psychological distance, they are more, folks are more familiar with places that they're familiar with. More or places that they're familiar with are closer, appear closer, and then those are less familiar with. And on pages 188 to 191, there are some mental maps there. I would encourage you to look at those. One of those is written by, I think, a Palestinian student. There's another one drawn up by a New Yorker, and another one by a child in a particular neighborhood. And I want you to read those, look at those, because I have a little extra activity for you, which I will enlarge on after the lecture's over, about mental maps. You guys are going to be hopefully doing those for me. Now, ideas spread, right? Ideas spread over distances. You have contagious diffusion and hierarchical diffusion. Over time, an idea may spread to long distances, even though it began locally. And figures 713 to 7 through 715 bear this out too, pages 195 and 196. So an example of this would be, and I did include it there for you, I think, as Christianity spread, Christianity began in Palestine, right? It begins in Palestine and it spreads to Europe. It spreads farther west, now making inroads in the Middle East and in Asia, right? But as it spread, right, as it spread, hierarchical diffusion got interjected into that, right? That's where contagious diffusion gets interjected with the concept of a category, a class or caste, right? So as Christianity spread, you see the offices of overseers and elders and deacons emerge. I mean, just take a look in your New Testaments. By the first century AD, the Apostle Paul in his letters, you can read that. He's talking about these types of offices as Christianity is getting bigger. And this could result too in a hierarchy of place too. State or federal government, state government, county government, township government, a public school system. You know, you got your flow chart there, the the school boards at the top, superintendent, the principal, and your regular classroom teacher. Migration. With migration, you have push factors. Push factors. Push factors are your negatives. These are your negatives. These are the things that people don't like about, where they live, and they're, forcing them to look elsewhere. It could be economic factors like poverty caused by, unemployment or famine. Political incentives, freedom. Why do Cubans, risk life and limb on rafts to go 90, miles? It's unbelievable, right? To get to Florida. 1 million Hutus back in the mid 90s, right? Fleeing ethnic Tutsis in Rwanda. Then you got your pull factors. These are your attractive attributes to a place. Could be cultural factors where language, religion, or ethnic background is more familiar, or the amenities of a place, the attractive features of a place. I had some good friends, lost contact with them many years ago, farther east, and they lived in a fairly conservative area, and they weren't happy about that. They were more of the liberal progressive stripe, and they were they were moving, and they were looking at so many more liberal citadels like Boston, San Francisco, right? Then you have people moving to the Sun Belt, right? Your Sun Belt states. The amenities of, the warmer weather. I know you know people who've done this. Place utility. Place utility speaks of where one is affected by perception, right? And you guys experience this right now, probably some of you, or you will, when you're sending out resumes, right? You may choose a region over another based off of your perception of those regions. I had a student several years ago who had a idea about Tennessee, certain area in Tennessee, and she told me she changed her mind. She did a little research on it. She found out that that area she was looking at led the state in carjackings. So that that research changed her opinion. But place utility, this is how migrants make the decisions to emigrate in the first place, right? And the primary reason is the value placed on a particular location that one considers residing. And all of this kind of hinges too on one's aspiration level, right? I mean, does one need to pay a mortgage in a town that offers just between the minimum wage and, just it doesn't pay good, right? A town that doesn't pay good. To the north of me, a little ways, like I said, down in Somerset, is the town of Johnstown, and there's not a lot of jobs up there, and they don't pay very well, and they continue to lose population. Folks moving elsewhere. So, and here's the thing about place utility, and I kind of touched on this with some of my examples. Your research will be a kind of a substitute for the actual experience. And you can turn to page 201, figure 719, figure 720, and 21 on page 202. Continuing on the migration, there are barriers to it. So the assessment of place utility, and place utility is that value, right? That value that's placed on potential residential locations, and that determines your decisions, or one's decisions to migrate, and it's colored by what we talked about earlier: stage of life, and career cycles, change in character or of the home area, okay, and individual personality traits. So incentives to migrate may be counterbalanced by migration barriers, and there are four of them. First one, physical barriers, right? Those natural barriers, such as mountains and oceans. Economic barriers, right? It costs money to do it. Costs money to do it. Cost of moving, traveling, selling one's home. Very burdensome, can be. Cultural barriers, ethnic, family, religious ties, and community relationships might be so strong that it leads one to reject moving out of a tough situation, right? Some of you can relate to that, know some folks that have had that influence on them. I know I have seen that. Then you got your political barriers. Governments frown on outsiders. Governments frown on outsiders, except maybe half of the United States Congress. We'll take a look at some migration patterns here, and then we'll wrap it up with globalization. So when undertaken, relocation tends to be affected by migration fields, channelized flows, I guess, if you want to, if you will, and hierarchical movements that defy the constraints of distance decay and cultural distance. So the process by which locational alternatives are evaluated is in geographical precincts called spatial search, and decisions are based with this on the balance between informational availability and place utility. Getting back to that, assessments of the decision maker. Now, migration patterns. You have 2 points here I want to talk about with that. Migration fields. What about an area? What about an area is causing the in and out migration patterns? Now, figure 725 on page 209 gives you some illustrations on where folks are, emigrating from and to, and even right here in the United States, where folks emigrating out of and to. And I think we touched on this in our earlier chapter. More and more people, in the past, there was a lot of out migration in the United States to Florida and California because of natural disasters in Florida and California. The opposite is happening. More people are leaving those states. Channelized flow, and you can see this too on. I get that page number right. I know I changed some of those there. Oh, okay, page 724, 208 for the first point. Yeah, I changed some page numbers there, and then figure 725 for um, the second point, your channelized flows. And in fact, let me write that. Let me key that in there. Well, you guys can write that in. I'll get when I get there. When the movement is connected to familiarity, like past social and economic patterns, that's known as a channelized flow. Channelized flows. And a classic example of this is your general European immigrants, in the 19th, early 20th centuries. The lion's share congregated along the Northeast. They go to Ellis Island, and uh, I mean, when they would migrate, they'd migrate pretty much in straight lines west. The Scandinavian people were a little different. They were used to a colder climate up in Scandinavia. So many of them, they not only did they not stay, in the Northeast or travel in a straight line from New York west, they went out to the upper Midwest to Minnesota. They went to Minnesota, and you go to Minnesota today. I lived there at one time, and a wide range of people there have Scandinavian descent as a result of this. And Minnesota, it's really hard to understand why anyone would want to move there, because it will be weeks on end without it getting above zero, believe me. And if you take a look at a map, a map of jet streams and stuff coming out of the Arctic, I mean, they get the Arctic jet stream hit out of Canada all the time. It's just, the Swedes were, and the Norwegians, Finns, and Danes emblemized channelized flows. But in your textbook, your author, figure 725, has a couple of other illustrations of some facets of that. And lastly, I want to talk about globalization. And in the past 20 years, 30 years, since the early 90s, the word globalization's crept into our political lexicon. There have been increases in technology, and an effort to reduce trade barriers has brought about an increased interconnection among the peoples of the world. And this trend, known as globalization, it affects economic, political, and cultural patterns and processes. Economic integration has come about in part through a rise in international banking. So the importance and number of transnational corporations and increased global marketing. The political integration has also increased as countries join organizations such as the World Trade Organization, right? An increase in number of non-governmental organizations or NGOs such as Greenpeace and Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders, come to mind right now, has also helped bring peoples of the world closer together. And then finally, global communications has led to more cultural interaction around the globe. Well, let's break this down and we'll see what's up ahead and call it a day here for chapter 7. The spread, we talk about globalization, what I want you to know there, this is basically the spread of ideas, technologies, crime, and diseases, right? Don't we know that with the pandemic? The flow of goods and services, long-term migration for work, political asylum, and family considerations, long-distance business links, and tourism. Your lab this week will deal with that, with the political asylum aspect. Unfortunately, migration tends to make some places worse with what we call the brain drain. And the brain drain is the loss of potential leaders and skilled workers. And what I'm talking about here is foreigners who make it good here in the States could have used the same talent back home, right? They could go back home and use the same talent. So the brain drain. You have shifts in dominant ideologies, especially religious or political beliefs. Throughout the 1990s, or since the 90s, democracy spread and more of the world witnessed elections. Therefore, more countries were involved in international affairs. The spread of images and messages through the medium of TV, film, the internet, and print. Uncontrollable negatives, such as the expansion of arms, drugs, diseases, and people trafficking. And you have the encouragement of internet terrorism. Some of the effects on our lives, the clothes we wear, the toys our kids play with, the doctors who tend us, access to the worldwide news at our fingertips via the internet. Economic integration, you have split-second changes in all markets are possible via foreign investing. Figure 7.28, page 211, has an interesting picture of I think some Sudanese folks and nearby a billboard trying to encourage them, I think, to invest in some American company. And then lastly, cultural integrations, right? Transnational corporations market products around the globe, like, for instance, Coke, McDonald's, various automobiles. Graphic organizer has been sent. You can look at that and wrap up the lecture by looking at those visual concepts. And let me just talk about what's up ahead. I know you guys know the drill by now, but there's a couple of little wrinkles in here. You're going to read Broken Borders this week. We're going to be the discussion will be dealing with migration, broken borders. I think it's in your. I think it's. I'm going to say it's page. I'm going to say it's page 206. I'm going to say it's page 2. I got my book right here. Let me just save you the trouble here. Page 206. Yes, page 206. Broken borders. Wednesday, I'm going to have you do a little extra wrinkle here for me on Wednesday. The mental maps. You're going to take a blank sheet of paper and you can do either map of the United States, map of the world, and just sketch it out and try to fill it in as best you can. There's no right or wrong answer. Do not worry about if it looks like Rembrandt did it or if you can remember how much you can remember. What I want you to notice is that with a mental map, psychological distance, that you're probably going to, what's going to be on that map are the countries or states either close to you or you're most familiar with. And it's amazing how when folks do the United States, what states are always on there. Never failed that there's a few states that are always on there. And I'm not talking about Pennsylvania, right? So you can see the page. Well, I just gave you the page 206. Or no, broken borders is 206, and I think it's page 188 to 191. Mental maps. You can take a look at some of those, get an idea about them. I have a reteaching assignment on Wednesday, and then the lab. The lab will be, you guys will be looking at asylum. Where are people coming from? Where are they going to? And what's the asylum process? And then of course Friday over the weekend you have your posts and quiz on Monday, and then we will be starting political geography in on Monday, right? And it just gets better and better. And by the time you're done with this course, you're not going to want to take another one. So anyway, I think that's it. So until next time, you guys have just a great week. And again, if you need anything outside of Sunday, you can find me, get my attention fairly easily, I think. So until then, see you next time. Bye bye.